It was a Tuesday, I remember, because the garbage trucks were doing their noisy, early morning ballet down my suburban street. Usually, the sound was a minor annoyance, a dull roar that I'd long since learned to tune out. But on that particular Tuesday, it was a symphony of chaos that perfectly mirrored the storm brewing inside me. I was a crypto trader, a self-proclaimed digital age warrior, and I was about to lose everything. My journey into the world of cryptocurrency had started 5 years earlier, not with a bang, but with a whisper. I was a mid-level marketing executive, grinding away in a beige cubicle, my life a monotonous cycle of spreadsheets and lukewarm coffee. I was a man in my late 30s, with a wife, 2 kids, and a mortgage that felt like a lead-weight chain to my ankle. I wasn't unhappy, not really, but I was stagnant. I yearned for something more, a spark of excitement in my predictable life. That spark came in the form of a podcast I stumbled upon during my daily commute. The host, a fast-talking enthusiast with a voice that crackled with infectious energy, was evangelizing about Bitcoin. He spoke of a decentralized future, of financial sovereignty, of a digital gold rush that was creating millionaires overnight. I was hooked. I started small, investing a few $100s here and there. I read every article, watched every YouTube video, and devoured every book I could find on the subject. I learned about blockchain technology, about altcoins, about the intricate dance of bulls and bears. The learning curve was steep, but I was a diligent student. I was fascinated by the charts, the patterns, the way a single piece of news could send the market soaring or plummeting. It was a world of high stakes and high rewards, a world where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. And I wanted in. My initial dabbles were surprisingly successful. I made a few $1,000s on a well-timed Dogecoin trade, a feat that made me feel like a financial wizard. I started to believe that I had a knack for this, a sixth sense for the market's whims. I was a natural. I started to invest more, my confidence growing with each successful trade. I was no longer a humble marketing executive. I was a crypto trader, a player in the new digital economy. My wife, Sarah, was supportive, if a little skeptical. She didn't quite understand the intricacies of what I was doing, but she saw the passion in my eyes, the way I lit up when I talked about it. "Just be careful, honey," she'd say, her voice a reminder of the real world that existed beyond the glowing screens of my trading setup. And I was careful at first. I set stop losses, I diversified my portfolio, I took profits when I could. I was a disciplined trader, or so I told myself. But the market has a way of seducing you, of making you believe you're invincible. My profits grew, and with them, my appetite for risk. I started to take bigger positions, to use leverage, to chase the thrill of the big win. I was no longer content with small gains. I wanted to hit the jackpot. I wanted to be one of those stories you read about on the internet. The guy who turned a few $1,000s into a multi-million-dollar fortune. The money was good, really good. I paid off our mortgage, bought a new car, and took the family on a lavish vacation to Hawaii. I was the man, the provider, the hero of my own story. I had escaped the drudgery of my 9-to-5 job, and I was living the dream. I was a king in my castle, and the crypto market was my kingdom. But every kingdom is vulnerable, and every king has a weakness. Mine was hubris. I started to believe that I was smarter than the market, that I could outwit the whales and the algorithms that controlled the flow of digital gold. I stopped listening to the cautious voices in my head, the ones that urged me to take a step back, to cash out some of my profits, to remember that what goes up must come down. I was on a roll, and I didn't want it to end. Then came the whispers, the rumors of a trade war with China. Donald Trump, ever the unpredictable showman, was threatening to impose a 100% tariff on all Chinese goods. The news sent a shiver through the traditional markets, but the crypto world seemed to shrug it off. We were a different breed, we told ourselves. We were immune to the whims of old-world politics. We were the future. But the future, it turned out, was not as certain as I had believed. The whispers grew louder, and the market started to get jittery. There were small dips, flashes of red in a sea of green, but nothing to cause any real alarm. I saw it as a buying opportunity, a chance to load up on more Bitcoin before the next big surge. I was so sure that I was right, so confident in my ability to predict the market's next move. And then it happened. It was a Tuesday morning, the garbage trucks were making their rounds, and my world was about to come crashing down. I was in my home office, a room that had become my sanctuary, my command center. I had multiple screens set up, each one displaying a dizzying array of charts and graphs. I was monitoring a large Bitcoin position, a leveraged trade that I had opened the night before. I was up by a significant amount, and I was feeling pretty pleased with myself. I had a stop-loss in place, of course, a safety net that was supposed to protect me from a catastrophic loss. But I had set it a little looser than usual, a little further down the line. I didn't want to get stopped out by a sudden, meaningless dip. I wanted to give the trade room to breathe, to ride out the volatility and continue its upward trajectory. It was a calculated risk, or so I thought. Then the news broke. A live feed on one of my screens showed Trump at a press conference, his face a mask of grim determination. He was announcing the 100% tariff effective immediately. The words hung in the air for a moment, a death sentence for the global economy. And then the market reacted. The sea of green on my screens turned to a bloodbath of red. The price of Bitcoin started to plummet, a vertical drop that defied all logic, all reason. It was a waterfall of digital despair, and I was caught in the torrent. I watched in horror as my profits evaporated in a matter of seconds. The numbers on my screen were a blur, a cruel taunt of what I had so briefly possessed. My heart was pounding in my chest, a frantic drumbeat against the silence of my office. I was frozen, a deer in the headlights of an oncoming financial freight train. And then the unthinkable happened. My stop-loss, my safety net, my last line of defense didn't trigger. The price was falling so fast, the market was so volatile that my order was simply skipped over. The system was overwhelmed, the liquidity had vanished, and I was left exposed, naked and vulnerable in the face of the storm. I tried to close the position manually, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the mouse. But it was too late. The price was in freefall, and there was nothing I could do to stop it. I was a passenger on a runaway train, and I was heading for a cliff. The margin call came in a cold, impersonal email. It was a death knell for my trading account, a final, brutal confirmation of what I already knew. I had been liquidated. Everything was gone. The profits, the initial investment, the dream of a life of financial freedom, all of it wiped out in a matter of minutes. I sat there for a long time, staring at the blank screens, the silence of my office a deafening roar in my ears. The garbage trucks had long since finished their rounds, and the sun was streaming through the window, a cruel reminder of a world that was still turning, a world that didn't care about my shattered dreams. I was a king without a kingdom, a warrior without a sword. I was a man who had lost everything. And the worst part was I had no one to blame but myself. The hubris, the greed, the reckless abandon, it had all led to this moment. The quiet devastation of a Tuesday morning, the day my world came to an end. The silence in my office was a physical thing, a heavy blanket that suffocated me. The adrenaline that had coursed through my veins just moments before had been replaced by a chilling numbness, a void that echoed the emptiness of my trading account. My hands, which had been trembling uncontrollably, were now still, resting on the cool surface of my desk like two lifeless birds. I stared at the screens, at the final, brutal candlestick that represented my financial demise. It was a long, red scar on the chart, a monument to my folly. I tried to process what had just happened, to make sense of the chaos that had unfolded with such terrifying speed. But my mind was a jumble of fragmented thoughts, a whirlwind of regret and disbelief. It couldn't be real. This had to be a nightmare, a cruel trick of the mind. I would wake up soon and everything would be back to normal. But the cold dread that was spreading through my chest told me otherwise. This was real. This was happening. I thought of Sarah, of the promises I had made to her, of the future I had painted for our family. A future free from financial worries, a future filled with travel and adventure and all the things we had ever dreamed of. And now, that future was gone, replaced by a gaping chasm of uncertainty. How could I tell her? How could I look her in the eye and admit that I had gambled away our security, our dreams, on a reckless bet? The thought of her face, of the disappointment and fear that would cloud her beautiful eyes, was a knife in my gut. And the kids, my two beautiful children, they were at school, blissfully unaware of the storm that had just ripped through their father's life. I had always wanted to be a hero to them, a provider, a man they could look up to. But now I was a failure, a fraud, a man who had let his ego and his greed destroy everything he held dear. The hours that followed were a blur. I don't remember much, just a series of disjointed images and sensations. The sun moving across the sky, casting long shadows in my office. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, a mundane sound that seemed to mock the magnitude of my loss. The taste of stale coffee in my mouth, the only thing I had consumed all day. I couldn't bring myself to leave my office, to face the world outside my self-imposed prison. I was a coward, hiding from the consequences of my actions. I replayed the events of the morning over and over in my head, a torturous loop of what-ifs and if-onlys. If only I had set a tighter stop-loss. If only I had taken some profits off the table. If only I had listened to that small, nagging voice in the back of my mind that had warned me I was flying too close to the sun. But regret is a useless emotion, a poison that seeps into your soul and paralyses you. And I was paralyzed, trapped in a state of shock and despair. I felt a profound sense of shame, a shame so deep that it was almost physical. I was ashamed of my arrogance, of my recklessness, of the way I had let my obsession with the market consume me. I had become a caricature of a trader, a greedy, adrenaline-fueled gambler who had lost touch with reality. As the day wore on, the numbness began to recede, replaced by a wave of raw, unfiltered emotion. Anger, hot and blinding, surged through me. I was angry at Trump, at his reckless words that had set the world on fire. I was angry at the market, at its cruel and unpredictable nature. I was angry at the faceless whales who had manipulated the price, who had feasted on the losses of small-time traders like me. But most of all, I was angry at myself. I was the one who had made the decisions, who had taken the risks, who had ignored the warning signs. I was the architect of my own destruction, and that was the hardest pill to swallow. The anger eventually subsided, leaving behind a hollow ache of despair. I felt a profound sense of loss, not just for the money, but for the person I had been. The confident, successful trader who had felt like he was on top of the world. That person was gone, replaced by a broken man, a shell of his former self. As darkness fell, I finally found the courage to leave my office. The house was quiet, a stark contrast to the storm that was raging inside me. Sarah was in the living room, reading a book, her face calm and serene in the soft glow of the lamp. She looked up as I entered, a warm smile on her face. And in that moment, I knew that I couldn't keep this from her. I couldn't carry this burden alone. I sat down on the couch next to her, my body heavy with the weight of my confession. I took her hand, my own still cold and clammy. And then the words came tumbling out, a torrent of shame and regret. I told her everything. The leveraged trade, the missed stop-loss, the margin call, the full, unvarnished truth of my failure. She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. I couldn't look at her, couldn't bear to see the disappointment in her eyes. I just stared at our intertwined hands, a small point of connection in a world that had suddenly become so vast and empty. When I had finished, the silence returned, heavier and more suffocating than before. I waited for her to speak, to yell, to cry, to do something, but she just sat there, her hand still in mine. And then she squeezed it, a small, gentle gesture that spoke volumes. I looked up, and I saw not anger or disappointment in her eyes, but a deep, profound sadness. A sadness for me, for us, for the future that we had lost. "We'll get through this," she said, her voice soft but firm. "We'll figure it out together." Her words were a lifeline, a glimmer of hope in the darkness that had consumed me. I didn't deserve her forgiveness, her understanding, her unwavering love. But she was giving it to me anyway. And in that moment, I knew that I hadn't lost everything. I still had her. I still had my family. And that was a foundation upon which I could rebuild. The road ahead would be long and difficult. We would have to make sacrifices to downsize our lives, to start over from scratch. The dream of financial freedom was gone, replaced by the harsh reality of debt and uncertainty. But as I sat there, holding my wife's hand, I felt a flicker of something that I hadn't felt all day, a glimmer of hope, a belief that maybe, just maybe, we could weather this storm, together. The king was dead, his kingdom in ruins. But the man, the husband, the father, he was still alive. And he would fight for the things that truly mattered. He would fight for his family. He would fight for a future that was not defined by the red candles of a volatile market, but by the enduring power of love and resilience. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since that fateful Tuesday morning, I felt like I had a fighting chance. The days that followed were a grueling test of my resilience. The initial shock had given way to a persistent, gnawing anxiety, a constant companion that whispered tales of failure and despair in my ear. Sleep offered little respite, my nights plagued by nightmares of falling charts and cascading liquidations. I would wake up in a cold sweat, my heart pounding, the phantom glow of red candles seared into the backs of my eyelids. The world outside my window seemed to move on with a callous indifference. The sun rose and set, the birds sang, the garbage trucks continued their weekly ritual. Life, for everyone else, was business as usual. But for me, it was a slow, painful crawl through the wreckage of my former life. Sarah was my rock, my anchor in the storm. She was a constant source of strength and support, her unwavering belief in me a beacon in the darkness. She never once said, "I told you so," never once made me feel like a failure. She just held my hand, listened to my fears, and reminded me that we were a team, that we would face this together. But even with her support, the weight of my failure was a heavy burden to bear. I had to face the practical consequences of my actions, the harsh realities of our new financial situation. We had to sell the house, the symbol of our success, the place where we had built our family. It was a painful, humiliating process, each open house a fresh reminder of what I had lost. We moved into a small, rented apartment, a far cry from the spacious home we had once known. The kids were confused and upset, their young minds unable to grasp the full extent of our predicament. I tried to explain it to them in a way they would understand, but the words felt hollow and inadequate. How do you explain to a child that you've gambled away their future? I had to go back to work, to the beige cubicle and the lukewarm coffee that I had so desperately tried to escape. My old boss, a man I had once looked down upon from my lofty perch as a successful crypto trader, took me back with a mixture of pity and smug satisfaction. I was a cautionary tale, a walking, talking reminder of the dangers of hubris and greed. The whispers followed me down the hallways, the knowing glances of my colleagues a constant source of shame. I was no longer the hero of my own story. I was the fool, the jester in the court of corporate mediocrity. The temptation to return to trading was a constant battle. I would find myself staring at the charts, a moth drawn to a flame. The market was recovering, the price of Bitcoin was climbing back up, and a part of me, the gambler's part, whispered that I could win it all back. I could make one more trade, one more roll of the dice, and everything would be right again. But I knew that was a lie. I had a disease, an addiction, and I couldn't afford to take another hit. I had to walk away to sever the ties that bound me to that world of 1,000 what-ifs. I sold my trading setup, the powerful computer and the multiple monitors that had once been my pride and joy. It was a symbolic act, a severing of the past, a commitment to a new, more grounded future. The road to recovery was long and arduous. There were days when the despair was so overwhelming that I could barely get out of bed. I was haunted by the ghost of my former self, the confident, successful man who had seemed to have it all. I mourned the loss of that man, the loss of the life we had built. But slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. I started to find joy in the simple things, the things that I had taken for granted in my pursuit of wealth. A walk in the park with my kids, a home-cooked meal with my wife, the laughter of my family filling our small apartment. These were the things that truly mattered, the real treasures that I had almost lost in my foolish quest for digital gold. I started to rebuild my life, one brick at a time. I focused on my work, on being a good husband and father, on finding a sense of purpose beyond the volatile world of the market. I learned to live with less, to find contentment in what I had rather than constantly striving for more. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I stumbled, when the old demons of greed and regret threatened to consume me. But I kept fighting, I kept moving forward one day at a time. Years have passed since that fateful Tuesday morning. The scars of my failure are still there, a permanent reminder of the price of hubris. But they have also become a source of strength, a testament to my ability to survive, to endure, to rebuild. I no longer follow the crypto market with the same obsessive intensity. I'm aware of its ups and downs, the booms and busts that continue to define it. But I'm no longer a participant, no longer a player in that high-stakes game. I'm an observer, a man who has learned a hard lesson about the true meaning of wealth. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I hadn't lost it all. Would I have continued down that path of reckless abandon, my life a never-ending roller coaster of euphoric highs and devastating lows? Would I have become a slave to the market, forever chasing the next big win? I'll never know for sure, but I have a feeling that my failure, as painful as it was, may have been a blessing in disguise. It forced me to confront my demons, to reevaluate my priorities, to find a more authentic and meaningful way to live. I'm no longer a king in a digital kingdom. I'm just a man, a husband, a father trying to make his way in the world. And for the first time in a long time, that feels like enough. The garbage trucks still come every Tuesday morning, their noisy ballet a familiar rhythm in the soundtrack of my life. But now, the sound is no longer a symphony of chaos. It's just a sound, a reminder that life goes on, that the world keeps turning, and that even after the most devastating of storms, there is always the promise of a new day. And for that, I am eternally grateful.